Michael never imagined his life would unravel in the blink of an eye. It was a typical afternoon, the kind where nothing seemed amiss. The sun was high, its warm rays bathing the city in light, and Michael, feeling unusually lighthearted, decided to surprise Sarah. He left work early, clutching a bouquet of daffodils, her favorite. For years, little surprises like these had been a quiet tradition, a way of reminding her how much he cared. He couldn't wait to see her smile, that familiar glint in her eyes. As he walked toward the cafe they frequented, he noticed her sitting by the large glass window. A nostalgic smile crossed his face. This was the spot where they had shared countless moments, where they had first met. But then, Michael's heart skipped a beat. Sarah wasn't alone. A man sat across from her, leaning in close, far too close. Michael's footsteps faltered, and he stood frozen, mere feet from the door. His mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe it was a colleague, a friend she hadn't mentioned. Yet something in the way she laughed, the way her hand brushed against the man's arm, told him otherwise. His stomach churned as he watched the scene unfold, feeling like a stranger peering into a life that no longer felt like his own. The daffodils slipped from his grasp, landing softly on the pavement. Everything else faded. The bustling city, the hum of people around him, all of it drowned by the sudden ringing in his ears. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat sending a fresh wave of disbelief through his body. He forced himself to move, pushing open the cafe door. The bell overhead chimed, a harsh contrast to the suffocating silence inside him. Sarah looked up, her laughter dying on her lips. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a split second, guilt flickered across her face, but she didn't speak. Neither did the man. They both sat still, as if caught in a frozen tableau. Michael. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it sliced through the air like a blade. She didn't stand, didn't rush to him with an explanation. There was nothing but the unspoken truth hanging between them. Michael couldn't breathe. The weight of betrayal pressed down on him, making it hard to think, hard to move. Without a word, he turned and walked out. The sun felt unbearably bright, mocking his pain with its relentless warmth. The city continued around him, indifferent to his crumbling world. His feet carried him away, though he had no destination in mind. The daffodils, once a symbol of affection, lay forgotten behind him, trampled by passing strangers. In the weeks that followed, Michael's life spiraled into an empty routine. The apartment he had once shared with Sarah felt unfamiliar, each room haunted by the echoes of her laughter and their once shared life. The bed, now too large and cold, reminded him every night of her absence. The framed photos on the walls, once symbols of happy moments, became painful reminders of how blind he had been. He tried to keep himself busy. Work became his escape, but even there, he couldn't fully outrun the memories. His colleagues noticed the shift in him. His usually sharp mind was distracted, his energy dulled. No one asked, but Michael saw their curious looks, felt their hesitations in approaching him. He preferred it that way. He wasn't ready to explain, wasn't ready to expose the depth of his humiliation. His phone buzzed constantly, messages from friends who had caught wind of the separation, offering support, advice, or simply a kind word. Michael ignored most of them, isolating himself further. He couldn't bring himself to respond, as if talking about it would make the betrayal more real. The silence around him grew heavier by the day, pressing in on him like an invisible weight. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the darkness, his mind wandered to Sarah's betrayal, replaying that moment at the cafe in endless loops. He would lie awake for hours, wondering how things had gone so wrong. What had he missed? How long had she been drifting away? The questions consumed him, gnawing at his sanity. One particularly restless night, Michael found himself staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep, when the thought struck him. He needed to leave. Not just the apartment or the city, but everything. The life he had built with Sarah felt tainted, and every corner of it was a reminder of what he had lost. He couldn't move on while surrounded by the ghosts of their past. The next morning, without much thought, he booked a flight to a remote coastal town he'd never heard of. It wasn't a planned decision, but in that moment, he didn't care. He just needed distance. Distance from Sarah, from the memories, from the overwhelming weight of his own pain. Michael packed his suitcase, filling it with the bare essentials. As he stood at the door of his apartment for what he knew might be the last time, he took one last look around. The place felt cold now, a shell of the life he had known. Closing the door behind him, he stepped out, unsure of where this new path would take him, but certain he couldn't stay. The salty, crisp air hit Michael as he stepped off the plane, instantly different from the suffocating weight of the city he had left behind. The coastal town sprawled out in front of him, simple and unpretentious. White sand beaches stretched toward the horizon, framed by rocky cliffs in the distance. It felt like another world entirely, detached, quiet, peaceful, exactly what he needed. He checked into a modest guest house perched on a hill overlooking the sea. His room was small but had a balcony with a view of the ocean. For hours, Michael would sit there, listening to the waves crash against the shore, watching the endless horizon. There was a comfort in the sea's rhythm, a reminder that life moved forward, no matter how broken it felt. He began to form a routine. Long walks on the beach at sunrise, quiet meals alone, evenings spent listening to the wind and the waves. The loneliness that had been crushing back home was now something different. It was solitude, a space where he could breathe, away from the expectations of his old life. It was on one of these morning walks that he first noticed her. She was perched on a cluster of rocks, her camera in hand, entirely focused on the horizon as the sun rose, casting the sky in hues of pink and gold. There was something captivating about the way she moved, the quiet intensity with which she captured each moment. Her dark hair swayed slightly in the breeze, but she didn't seem to notice. Michael paused, watching her for a moment, not out of romantic interest, but because she seemed like a part of the scenery itself. Calm, natural, yet utterly compelling. Their eyes met briefly when she turned to adjust her position, but she offered no more than a small nod before returning to her work. Michael didn't approach her. He wasn't ready to engage with anyone yet, much less a stranger who exuded such quiet confidence. In the days that followed, he saw her again, sometimes at a distance along the shore, other times at the small cafe where he often ate breakfast. They never spoke, but there was an unspoken awareness between them. She was part of the backdrop of his new life here, a distant figure he was curious about, though still hesitant to approach. For now, he was content with the silence. After all, it was silence that had brought him this far. As the days turned into weeks, the woman with the camera became less of a distant figure and more of a familiar presence. Her quiet, focused energy intrigued Michael, and it wasn't long before their paths crossed more directly. One evening, as Michael sat at his usual spot on the beach, watching the sunset, he saw her approaching, her camera hanging from her neck. This time, she paused near him, glancing at the horizon before looking down at him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" she said, her voice low but clear, carrying over the soft murmur of the waves. Michael nodded, his gaze shifting from the sky to her. Up close, there was a serenity about her that felt calming, as if she had found a way to make peace with the world around her. "Yeah, it is." They fell into an easy silence, the kind that didn't demand words. After a few minutes, she lowered herself onto the sand beside him, sitting cross-legged and facing the ocean. She didn't introduce herself or force a conversation, and Michael found that he appreciated the quiet companionship. After what felt like an eternity, she finally spoke. "I've noticed you around. You seem like someone who's searching." Michael wasn't sure how to respond. Her observation was too close to the truth, too raw. "Maybe I am," he admitted, surprised at how easily the words came. She glanced at him, her eyes soft but knowing. "Me too." That brief exchange opened the door to something deeper. Over the next few days, their encounters became more frequent, more deliberate. They started sharing more than just silent moments on the beach. They talked cautiously at first about their lives. Michael learned her name, Lily, and that she was a traveling photographer, capturing beauty in forgotten corners of the world. It wasn't long before their conversations turned to more personal matters. Michael found himself sharing bits of his story, something he hadn't done since the day he'd left his old life behind. He told her about Sarah, the betrayal, and the overwhelming need to escape. To his surprise, Lily didn't respond with pity or shock. She simply listened, her eyes holding a quiet understanding. When it was her turn to speak, she shared her own story of loss, a relationship that had crumbled under the weight of lies and broken promises. "I thought I could run from it," she said one evening, her voice steady but laced with pain. "But no matter where I go, it's still there, following me." Their shared pain became a bridge between them. Neither of them pushed for more than the other was willing to give, but slowly, the walls they had both built began to crumble. Michael realized that, with Lily, he didn't have to pretend to be whole. She saw his brokenness, and he saw hers. And for the first time since Sarah, he felt like he could breathe again. As the days passed, Michael and Lily's connection deepened. What had started as tentative conversations turned into longer talks, shared meals, and eventually, shared adventures. One morning, Lily suggested they hike to a secluded spot along the coast that she had discovered during one of her photography sessions. Michael hesitated at first, still unsure of how much he wanted to let someone in. But the thought of spending more time with her, exploring something new, was too tempting to resist. He agreed, and they set out early, following a narrow path that wound through the hills. The hike was harder than Michael had expected. The trail was steep in places, the rocks uneven, but Lily moved with an easy grace, her camera slung casually over her shoulder. She would occasionally stop to snap a photo, her eyes lighting up with excitement whenever she found the perfect shot. "How did you get into photography?" Michael asked as they paused at the top of a hill, overlooking the vast expanse of the ocean below. Lily smiled, a genuine, soft smile that made Michael's chest tighten. "It started as a way to escape. I was always searching for something beautiful, something real. I guess in a way it helped me find balance when everything else felt chaotic." Michael nodded, understanding her in a way he hadn't understood anyone in a long time. There was something comforting about her passion, her ability to find beauty in even the smallest things. When they finally reached the secluded cove, Michael was struck by its untouched beauty. The beach was small, nestled between towering cliffs, with the waves gently lapping at the shore. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over everything, making the scene almost surreal. "This is incredible," Michael said, awe filling his voice as he looked around. Lily smiled, clearly pleased with his reaction. "I thought you'd like it." They spent hours there, exploring the tide pools, taking photos, and simply enjoying each other's company. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, they sat side by side on the sand, their shoulders barely touching. There was a quiet intimacy between them now, something that went beyond words. Michael felt the pull of it, the undeniable connection that had been growing since they first met. But with that pull came fear. He had been hurt before, deeply, and the thought of opening himself up to that kind of pain again terrified him. Lily seemed to sense his hesitation. She glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. "We can just be." Michael looked at her, really looked at her, and in that moment he realized that maybe he didn't need to protect himself so fiercely anymore. Maybe, just maybe, it was okay to let someone in again. Despite the growing connection between them, both Michael and Lily remained hesitant. There was an unspoken fear that lingered in the spaces between their words. Fear of getting too close. Fear of repeating old mistakes. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the guest house, sipping wine and watching the stars, the tension finally bubbled to the surface. Lily seemed quieter than usual, her camera resting on the table beside her, untouched. She stared at the horizon, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the rim of her glass. "I thought I was ready to move on," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "But being here with you, it's brought back all the things I thought I'd buried." Michael didn't respond immediately. He understood the feeling all too well. Being with Lily had stirred up emotions he hadn't expected, emotions he wasn't sure he was ready to face. "I get it," he said after a long pause. "I've been telling myself that I'm okay, that I've moved past what happened with Sarah. But the truth is I'm scared. Scared of letting someone in again, of getting hurt." Lily turned to him, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored his own. Me too, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. I don't know if I can handle another heartbreak. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their fears pressing down on them. But in that silence, something shifted. Michael reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. Maybe we don't have to stop being afraid, he said quietly. Maybe we just have to take the risk anyway. Lily looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. She squeezed his hand, a silent agreement. They both knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long time, they were willing to take the risk. The morning after their conversation, Michael woke with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in months. He knew that his feelings for Lily were real, and despite his fear, he was ready to embrace whatever came next. He found her on the beach, sitting with her camera in her lap, staring out at the waves. There was a calmness about her that soothed his nerves as he approached. She glanced up when he reached her, offering him a small, tentative smile. I've been thinking, Michael began, sitting down beside her, about everything we talked about last night. Lily nodded but didn't interrupt, sensing that he needed to get the words out. I'm scared, he admitted, his voice steady but quiet. But I think I'm more scared of walking away from this, whatever this is, than I am of getting hurt again. I don't want to live in fear anymore. Lily's eyes softened, her hand reaching out to take his. Me neither. They sat there for a moment, their hands intertwined, the sound of the waves crashing gently in the background. It wasn't a grand declaration of love, but it didn't need to be. It was a quiet, mutual understanding that they were ready to move forward together, no matter what the future held. As they walked back to the guest house, hand in hand, Michael felt lighter than he had in months. The weight of his past was still there, but it no longer felt like a burden he had to carry alone. With Lily by his side, he felt hopeful. The days passed in a blur of contentment. Michael and Lily continued to grow closer, their connection deepening with every shared experience, every quiet moment. The coastal town had become a kind of sanctuary for them both, a place where they could heal, rebuild, and dream about the future. One afternoon, while Michael was walking through the town center, lost in thought, a familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. Michael? He turned and saw Sarah standing just a few feet away, her expression a mix of surprise and something else, guilt. She looked different, worn, as if the months apart had taken a toll on her. Her eyes, once full of certainty, now seemed clouded with regret. I didn't expect to see you here, she said, her voice faltering slightly. How have you been? Michael's heart pounded in his chest, a rush of emotions flooding him all at once. Anger, hurt, and something else he hadn't expected. Indifference. He had imagined this moment countless times since she had betrayed him, imagined what he would say if he ever saw her again. But now, standing in front of her, all those rehearsed words seemed pointless. I've been fine, he replied, his voice steady, though he could see the discomfort in Sarah's eyes. She wasn't used to this version of him, the version that wasn't crushed by her absence. Sarah glanced around, as if trying to gather her thoughts. Michael, I've been thinking about everything, about what I did. She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. I've been miserable without you. Michael watched her carefully, his mind whirling. This was the woman he had loved, the woman who had shattered his world. And now, here she was, asking for forgiveness. Part of him wanted to feel vindicated, wanted to hear her beg for another chance. But another part of him, the part that had grown stronger over the past months, felt only a quiet sense of closure. I'm sorry, Michael, Sarah continued, her eyes pleading with his. I miss you. I miss us. I want to make things right. There it was, the apology he had waited so long to hear. And yet, it didn't stir the emotions he had expected. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even hurt. He just felt done. I'm not the same person I was when we were together, Sarah, Michael said, his voice calm. You made your choice, and I've made mine. Sarah's face crumpled, her eyes filling with tears. Please, Michael, I know I hurt you, but I've changed. We can start over. But Michael shook his head, his decision already made. No, Sarah. It's too late. Just then, Lily appeared, walking toward them with a gentle smile. She stopped when she saw the tension between Michael and Sarah, but there was no hesitation in her steps. She walked up to Michael's side, slipping her hand into his. Sarah's eyes flicked to Lily, understanding dawning in her expression. I see, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Michael gave her a small, almost pitying smile. Goodbye, Sarah. And with that, he turned and walked away, Lily by his side. As they moved further from Sarah, Michael felt an undeniable sense of peace. He had finally closed the chapter on that part of his life, and there was no going back. Lily looked up at him, her eyes full of warmth. Are you okay? Michael smiled, squeezing her hand. Yeah, he said, his voice light. I'm more than okay. As they walked along the beach, the sun setting on the horizon, Michael knew that this, right here, with Lily, was where his new beginning truly started. If you liked this story, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your suggestions and ideas for future stories. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when new content is released.